to The Labyrinth, The Cry. It's on page 32. There is a, Natasha, there is a discussion on pages 21, 22 on Freud's, Fort Da, it's on Beyond the Pleasure Principle, being developed as the Bobbin Theater, as an alternative theater, the Bobbin Theater. You might want to take a look at that. The discussion of the Labyrinth, the Cry, gets us back to some of the faces, the images that are there. It also talks about what constitutes communication within this book. Okay. It's reminiscent of Boris's Labyrinth. Let's take a look at it. See what we can make of it. Again, page 32. I took a couple Advil, so I feel so much better. I don't know what it was, but I was really losing it. The Labyrinth, the Cry. The Labyrinth is a flint desert exposed to the Near Eastern sun, without wall, door, or window, a chalk surface. We recognize its model, a labyrinth, which in his mania for knowledge, one of our professors constructed for the instruction of a wingless insect. Made from an immaculate box fully lit by an arc lamp, the white terror, which it was supposed to communicate to the beast, had to impel it to go all the way through this labyrinth without error. In this way, the acquisition of habits is studied and the animal's intelligence evaluated by the number of attempts necessary to achieve a faultless crossing. The cut-up box rested on a sheet of water, which also frightened the insect. The beast, it's on page 262. I have a note here, 262, see it, see this. Oh, a beast, okay, good. The animal book. You know how it ends with all the yes, yes, yes? With the end, four S's. With an allusion supposedly to Molly and Ulysses. James Joyce. The beast expelled from the dark shelter where it was kept runs in all directions, an almost imperceptible silver thread, terrified. It never learns this labyrinth. Terror is the labyrinth. In the labyrinth is such that it precludes the observation and notation of identities. This is why the labyrinth is not a permanent architectural construction, but is immediately formed in the place and at the moment. On what map, according to what calendar, where there is terror. The labyrinth then does not exist, but there are as many labyrinths in it as terrifying emotions, whether or not they are felt. Each encounter gives rise to a frantic voyage towards an outside of suffering. What's the purpose of this labyrinth here? I mean, why is he appropriated to talk about it here? The suppression of this could only result in an identical repetition of the encounter. So far, in terms of communication, what kind of communication has been going on? Between the faces that have been pointed to. One flees perhaps to learn to rediscover the encountered property, because through repeating it one hopes to be able to localize it, to set up its situation, to inscribe it in a time. But since this terror produces its own singular labyrinth, there are other corridors, other corners than those which the flight and the fleer are able to delineate. This is why the beast learns nothing. It multiplies incomparable labyrinths. The beast is, this beast, we're talking about the insect, right? The wingless insect?
You're in page 32?
I'm sorry?
33 now.
33 now.
Okay.
The section, the labyrinth, the cry.
For some reason, our pages are not the same. Now you know because you and I were on the same page.
Yeah, I'm on, hold on, I just lost it. 31, I think it's, for us, it's one behind.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Victor, but I couldn't concentrate, not trying to find what I couldn't find.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's
It's
okay.
one page behind whatever he says.
Okay.
No.
Terror in the labyrinth. Okay, got it.
Okay, now look what happens in the next paragraph. A similar feature justifies the strange behavior of one of my Italian friends, which he recounted to me while acknowledging his inability to account for it. A researcher, he had left his laboratory very late, exhausted, and he had gone to a reception given by one of his friends, a cultural director in one of the town's big museums. This reception was held in some of the rooms of the museum itself. It was celebrating the museum's renovation and new organization, more appropriate for doing justice to modern artworks, but it also marked the end for my friend's friend of the contract by which for several years the town had charged him with the creation and presentation of pictorial, musical, and cinematographic activities. When my narrator entered the museum, the crowd of his friends was scattered throughout all the open rooms, which formed a closed chain. Groups everywhere chat, scream, laugh, ask each other questions, smoke, drink, eat, recognize each other around the buffets. The two pop groups, the gallons of flowing wine, and armchairs are sit on the floor. All the faces make it seem that my friend might know them. His tiredness and his isolation happen, so to speak, to balance each other, alleviated and aggravated. He takes to eating, drinking, without meeting anyone. So, what's going on here? Recounting without an account. Communication without communication. How does this parallel with the insect for that, with wingless insect? Others are present only in the form of photographic reproductions, but all of them, silent to atonement, were still there simply in order to bear witness to past activities, like traces before effacement. The rooms diametrically opposite the buffet and the bandstand are almost empty. He flees them, returns to the swollen belly of the crowd, crosses and waves to his friend, the curator, drinks again, begins the circuit again, examining the faces as much as the walls, prey to the growing agitation, which he notices never ends. What the scene reminds me of, Edgar Allan Poe's The Man of the Crowd. Do you know this story? The Man of the Crowd. It's a man who leaves his apartment and he goes into the center of town where there are all these people. And it becomes his flight through these people, just not to try to get on the other side, but to stay within is like a fugue, a musical fugue. He's just moving all around in there, the man of the crowd, like touching, brushing up, being with them, but not being with them at all. Okay. There's an encounter that's going on here. What's the name of the section?
The Labyrinth, the cry.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost it. The Labyrinth, the cry. It is on this second circuit that he recognizes on a wall a face. I mentioned all this to you earlier. Recently photographed at the time of a Warhol exhibition in front of a series entitled Maryland, a mediocre cliche in black and white, like a line drawing exaggerating the harshest values. In front of the grid formed by the series of the actresses' portraits, that themselves just a painted cliche. He brought to a halt by the face of a woman who some years previously had been his mistress. She is turning towards the lens with affected surprise. Her mouth half opens, as if the photographer had called to her just when she looked at the picture. The hair, the eyebrows, the makeup on her eyelids, and lips are here, coal black. The glistening of the irises and pupils is faithfully mimicked. The photograph is pinned up by 4 drawing pins. And so on and so on. Okay? And then he steals the photo. Remember? Page 35, I mentioned it earlier too. He slips the photograph under the door. He takes it, he finds where she lives, slips it under the door, runs quickly down the spiral stair, takes the lift, gets back into his car, and waits with all the lights off. He was followed. He hears his pursuer's footsteps in the humid, deserted streets. It is the woman's boyfriend. My friend sets off without knowing if he has been identified. Some weeks later she calls him up, saying that she doesn't understand what he was doing bringing the photo. Waits for an explanation. He feigns astonishment. What photo is she talking about? She knows very well. He hasn't any of her. She cannot comprehend him. The hero of the story tells me that he was not aware of what he was doing, and so on and so on. Okay, so this is an act of communication. First of all is the wingless insect inside the labyrinth, not able to get through to his destination. And then we have this human being without any communication whatsoever. What's going on here? Why is Lyotard talking about this? What is this about?
He's talking about the multiplication of labyrinths. That, every time this wingless insect is set upon by this terror in this labyrinth, that it's like a new labyrinth. You'll never figure it out. It's never possible. It's going to take weeks for that to clear up. But in the story of his friend, each one of these kind of movements constitute its own labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's nothing clear and distinct. It's never evident, and although he's living it, he still is not aware of what's going on. There's an encounter without encounter.
So, this then is in the libidinal band when it's going really, really fast. There's not communication, but only encounters, very strange encounters. What the hell do you make of it? Okay, let's jump down here. You were talking about labyrinths and labyrinths and labyrinths. We seek mid-page 35. No, we seek know why and judge ambivalence a little platitude. In the labyrinth of the museum, my friend, the wingless insect,
Perfect.
had an encounter. Now we're getting an explanation. He began the circuit over and again, 7 times, each time. He loses his way in front of the photo. He learns nothing. He flees the image, but finally takes it with him. The image opens the second labyrinth, that of the town streets, the corridors, and staircases and buildings. The second encounter takes place in this other labyrinth, which grows disconcertingly from the encounter in the first. The delivery of the photo puts an end to the second labyrinth, and the suffering of which it is the effect of which was encountered in the first. The ironic denial on the telephone marks the dissolution of the third labyrinth. originating somewhere, perhaps in this woman, from the relocation of the photograph. A fourth labyrinth may then be opened onto the listener, but no, nothing of the sort happened, it appears, unless the fact that my friend had told me of this event, and that I am publishing it would have to be considered as a third encounter, opening a labyrinth of which I am ignorant, even of the material from which it might be made. In any case, none of this can be decided. No one has the power to draw up the map of the great film. This, seen from the outside, but it has no outside, will be some kind of monstrous beast. There are nothing but encounters here. Yeah, the film, the reference to the film, is the surface of the bone.
Yeah, and, it's interesting, in the French it's actually skin.
Yeah, skin, right. As it is on that first page that we read with the note. When the Roman friend, this is paragraph 10. When my Roman friend passes from one labyrinth to another, he is not moving through a spatial temporal grid. The labyrinths, which for convenience sake I call first, second, etc., in no way form an ordered series. They do not belong to a structure of carrying over. Nothing of the one is rediscovered in the other, at least as long as each is formed as a sort of cyclone around a heart, which is the encounter. So down to the next paragraph. It must not be said that the encounter takes place in the labyrinth. The labyrinth issues from the encounter. There are only encounters. There are only encounters, each tracing at full speed around itself a multitude of transparent walls, secret thresholds, open grounds, empty skies in which each encounter flees from itself, overflows itself, is forgotten, or is repeated, ceasing then to be an encounter. This latter does not return, does not reproduce itself. The insect's terror is unique, new every time. Nothing is inscribed. A complete layout of the unconscious needs to be constructed in order to succeed in inputting to it the responsibility for the return of the same. That's right out of Levinas. It must be supposed that its effects are subordinated to a system on which identities are what amounts to the same thing. Differences could be identified. And so the pulsions are stupid exactly to the extent that they do not repeat the same effects. Therefore, they invent. Invention is a triviality of time. In the theologian, Borges imagines two heresies by non-repetition. One is the act of certain sects called histrions, of whom he writes, they reasoned that the world would end when the number of its possibilities was exhausted. Since there can be no repetitions, the righteous should commit the most infamous acts, so that these will not soil the future and will hasten the coming of the kingdom of Jesus. The other heretics belonging to the diocese of Aurelian affirmed that time does not tolerate repetition, etc. Next paragraph. So the labyrinth ceaselessly invents and effaces itself. This is the histrions again. The first heretics, he cites, profess and practice the impatience to have done with it. But however much they affirm that nothing repeats itself, if they can hope to participate the coming of the promised result in committing and thus eliminating the most infamous acts, it is that they think that the quality of evils is not innumerable, and that a backwards count may be taken up somewhere else, at the end of which the truth will be attained. Their ethics is an algebra of the primacy of the negative. But can both the heresy of singularity and the heresy of acceleration be sustained at the same time? These maneuvers are not perverse, since their infamy is at last concentrated into the negative on the immaculate mystical body of Jesus. Such a theology we say to be as wretched as Hegel's. It remains within the dialectic of good and evil, hardly caricatured and rendered amusing. The phenomenology of the mind is 96 images per second, a 33 RPM record of the Phaedra switched to 78. But that the earth must always be touched for the first time, the moon be seen, the bird be heard, and the other heresy professes. This is the element, the Aurelian. The moon be seen, the bird be heard, and the other heresy professes. That is harsh. In another way, my Italian friend would adhere to this sad innocence, as would my friend the insect. Great fears, great loves are not inscriptions on the spatial temporal register, and continuity or fidelity play no part in them, since there is nothing permanent from one encounter to the other, only the singular intensity, opening its own labyrinth each time. What is this all about? What do you make of this? It's an extensive passage that I read. What's it all about? He's talking about the tensors here in the body in terms of communications. But it's communication without communication. It's like a fugue state. Freud sometimes talks about fugue states, where people just, they're all over the place, but, and they're everywhere, okay? And they bump up against all these people, and there's a kind of communication going on there without any communication whatsoever. Why does he talk about the libidinal band in apparently less than pleasing manner with examples? I mean, why would we want to even think in terms of anything positive in the libidinal band? Please, go ahead.
Is it partially just because it's somewhat better than the alternative to the statement, the effect of powerlessness must be remembered, which is in 35? So it seems, to me, it feels like that statement is sort of at the heart of a lot of this. It's the effect of powerlessness must be remembered. And the alternative to that remembering is even worse. So even if literally remembering, this giving members to that happens throughout this sort of multiplication of labyrinths via the multiplication of encounters, even if that's painful and difficult, it still seems like that's better. I mean, this is just kind
That's
of
what it,
asking.
I think that's
better
what he's
than the
trying to
white terror
communicate. Yeah.
of the alternative.
Basically, I guess what he's describing here are a transition into singularities, which can only encounter, cannot even begin to communicate. Some of these have got to be mind experiments, okay, which we spend time with. The cry. Let's listen to the pleas of the unfaithful husband. How did we get here? How does he link these things together? Is there some sort of parallel logic here that we can, use to try to understand what's going on here? I'm asking you, okay? I'm not going to tell you what my thoughts are. Not that I even have any, okay? let's listen to the go ahead.
No, the problem I think with, or the greatness, maybe I should not say, is that you read it from, in your own score. I've been reading all this through Borges. I have not, Borges,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, not necessarily this, not just this, but all of Borges' work that I've read. So every time he says something, I'm not reading him anymore, I'm reading Borges. And I think that's part of what he wants. It's another labyrinth in where one idea, one story will take you to another and to another and to another, and you're encountering not just with other human beings, but with other thoughts of others that will bring you to another explosion of possibilities. Because the labyrinth, in any case, it's a world of possibilities.
Yes.
Borges has many stories on labyrinths, but there's one that is the one I like the most. It's a story about this king in France that invites all the different whoever heads of states, and there's the one from an Arab world country in the desert. Let's call it Egypt. It doesn't matter. He never names anything, but he decides to play in the labyrinth in the French side with all the heads of states, but at the end it's only the French one and this Arab human being. And obviously this poor Arab cannot understand how to get out of there. You know, there's no way he can see what's going on in the labyrinth to be able to get out. But there's an extra to this. It's a very short story. If he doesn't get out, he could be killed. Anyway.
By the beast.
Yeah, he's not killed. And then the Arab monarch invites the French guy and says, okay, I'm going to take you to my labyrinth. He drives into the desert, and there it is. Now go back home. He leaves him there in the desert. No coordinates, no Cartesian plane, no anything to guide, nothing, no mountain to tell you where you are. Maybe you know where the sun comes out, but where does the desert end? So to me, that symbolism of the labyrinth without a labyrinth, because there is no labyrinth. So I've been reading all of that through that story, and I'm going to tell another story of Borges, which is absolutely gorgeous.
I cannot help to think about the labyrinth from, the mythological tale of the palace in Knossos,
Yes.
in the Minotaur, and all this meaning that labyrinths, also from Greek mythology, have to try to go to the center of the labyrinth, and then the way out was also an opportunity to rethink life or to start again. It's very connected to life and death.
But where's the thread?
Ariadne's thread
Yeah.
to get out.
Yeah.
It's the feud. They're running all the way to the mountain. He answers most of our questions, I think, on page 41. They're not very satisfied with the answer. There is no intensity without a cry. No, let me bump up. The cry, about 8 lines down from the top of 41. The cry which resounds in your helplessness, unfaithful one, is not your wife's nor yours. It's true. It is the noise made on the band by the incompossibility of several co-present intensities. The ancient gods were jealous of each other. This Olympus full of their cries. It is the great venom, a little simplified, turning and returning on itself, following its labyrinths like a monster attacked in several places at once. There is no intensity without a cry and without a labyrinth. If force strikes a given surface, jump down to the next paragraph. It is necessary to hear the cry of the insect thrown under the glare of 500 watts and fleeing into the maze. Every labyrinth is traced as flight towards an outlet. There is no outlet. as the professor waited for the beast to do, the way of being accustomed, that is, depression and inhibition, or else through an encounter in a new cry, another labyrinth, another time opens up, but nobody is the master of encounters. Love is not giving what one does not have. It is having to cry near to areas struck by lightning. My examples are of suffering. They could have been of elation. There are labyrinths of joy. This really is a segue into the tensor.
You're going to stop in the middle of that sentence.
Yeah, go ahead and finish it,
The
please.
latter no less mad than suffering. Very close to it.
You call the, when you put a sentence at the beginning of a book, you call it epigraph? Is that the word? The epigraph of the book is just that. Who knows not how to hide, knows not how to love.
Yes. Now, what world's that mean? Tell me. Because there are epigraphs I have seen that were the absolute opposite. Like, for example, no one can hide, a love
Yeah.
or an infatuation or whatever. Everyone knows. But who knows not how to hide,
Mm-hmm.
knows not how to love.
Love and shelter.
Okay, page 42, last paragraph. We do not speak as the liberators of desire. Idiots with their little fraternities, their Fourieresque fantasies, their policy holders' expectations over the libido. We have nothing to do anymore with regilding the heraldry of the tragic. The tragic still necessarily presupposes the great zero, prison guard of destinies, mute allocutor, Jewish god, or enigmatic locutor, Greek oracle. What does the unfaithful one seek in his peregrinations? What he betrays, or what he encounters. He necessarily betrays what he encounters, and necessarily encounters what he betrays. Hence, his joy and terror are intermixed, a vertigo which sweeps away the signposts and the directions of the movement, which destroys the landmarks, the egos. It is not the tragedy of a destiny nor the comedy of a character. It can be presented in this way, of course. No longer the drama of totalization, rather the strangeness of fictive spaces, Escher's waterfalls, whose point of impact is higher than their sources. There's no utopia here. And so it's quite appropriate that he mentions Bleswowski once, I think, who wrote a book, Sod, My Neighbor. What a title, Sod, My Neighbor. Let's see if he's in here more than once. No, quite a few times, Bleswowski. Okay, let's see what page we're on, page 42. Oh man, he really begins to kick ass later. Okay, the tensor. The semiotic sign is nihilism. This is all about communication. The labyrinths of communication. But the addressee, the person who's being addressed, suffers. We don't know who the addressor is. In the code, it goes crazy. Sign, 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 sign. And we're all lost in the mezzine on signs, labyrinth of communication. Here's a fun paragraph, page 44, first full paragraph. See what you have done? The material is immediately annihilated. Where there is a message, there is no material. Adorno said this admirably of Schoenberg. The material, he explained, is serialism. Does not count as such, not only as a relation between terms. And in Boulez, there will be nothing but relations, not only between pitches, but also between intensities, timbres, durations. We are lost in a abyss of signs, or what could be referred to as rhetoricity. As there are as many labyrinths, there are as many different interpretations. All have to be accepted. And that's part of the pain. Because I want to know what it means, man, okay? No, don't give me all these goddamn interpretations. I want to know what it means. Okay. Did I scare you?
Yes.
Sorry.
We're used to it.
A lot of talk about the pleasure principle and all that kind of stuff on page 52, 53. Dora, again, it's all about death. There's one thing that's very clear is that Deleuze and Guattari want to throw away beyond the pleasure principle. I'm exaggerating. Okay? Lyotard says we can't throw it away. We have to live with it. Okay? So he's working it in throughout this book. The band is going to slow down and it's going to freeze over. It cannot keep on. These are momentary stays against execution. So if you take it in terms of political economy and libidinal economy, and you recognize both, and actually you collapse political economy into libidinal economy, there will be, everything will freeze over. Everything will fall into entropy. There is no way to maintain this. And I don't know anyone who has said the opposite. Even Deleuze and Guattari said this. After I read Anti-Oedipus 2 dozen times over a period of 2 or 3 years, then Plateaus came out and I read it, and it was at the end of the long discussion. Do you know this passage where basically
Many believe that smooth space will suffice to save us.
they have abandoned us, amusing us while we're moving towards death. Death, why remember? The paragraph. There are 2 principles then, and these principles are not instances identifiable according to their respective functions. Eros being capable of unbinding and setting free, death binding to the point of being a strangler. And Freud himself, who didn't see this clearly, nevertheless recognized it at the end of Intensities, when he says, in the space of a few lines, first, that the pleasure principle is subordinated to the death drives. It is then that he understands these latter as a system of compulsions to repeat, which wants to bring everything back, even the most painful things, like the dreams and traumatic neuroses, and that it is necessary to suppose a binding through repetition prior to all discharges, if it is true that this requires channels of facilitation and specific actions in order to produce satisfaction. So it's very interesting because compulsions to repeat in the death drive. You've seen people who just repeat something over and over again. Okay? It's the little things like, it's like trying to get it right here. You've seen people do that kind of thing. And no matter what, they're not going to be able to get it, exactly the way they want. And then they do something like this, and do that kind of self-comedians. But they're fooling around with this. You see people do that. Right? And so what is this all about? It's saying basically it's a death drive. And what about these pulsions? And what about these tenses and this band that's going around? I mean, this is a book that's hopeless. This is what I'm saying now.
Yeah.
At this point in time, there is no hope. Okay. On this page from now on, from 53. Okay? But I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, I do know. I've read it several times. But there's no hope at this point. Minutes we can take a break. Then Dora's cough again. Compulsion or repetition. I mean, how many times did it keep going back? Do you know about this, Dora? Dora was Freud's really famous patient, and what he has to write in the case, in that particular case, is incredible because he says he can't get enough information, and instead of writing a case study, he has to write like a short story. He's got to fill in missing points and that kind of thing. At least he's aware that he's doing it, and that he's suffering from hysteria. He does not, which means a loss of some sense of identity, and you become all these different people. Okay. But she just simply got fed up with him. She becomes a hero, a Shira, and she gives him 2 weeks' notice. Which is comparable to what a maid, you would give a maid. So, 2 week notice. Because he kept insisting on particular interpretations, knowing that he couldn't be really precise about it. But her cough. Okay, there's a lot of, looking at proper names here. Intensity, the name marks. The name Flechier, Schraber's doctrine, and so on. Oh, look at.
There is a little bit of hope here.
I'm sorry?
There's a little bit of hope here. On 54 there.
Okay, let's see.
Libidinal intensity.
And
We are almost tempted, but we will not do this. We've become sly old foxes, too often trapped, to give it a priority and to say, in the last instance, if you, semiologists, have any cause to set up your nets of meaning, it is primarily because there is this positive incandescence. Because first of all, it is Dora's throat which seizes up, because there is, in short, a given. And this given is indeed the intensification of a particular region of the beautiful Dora's body. It is this region indeed which has become an intelligible sign. But we are not even saying this. We are indifferent to priorities and causalities, these forms of guilt, as Freud and Nietzsche said. And I guess I feel like that's the sense that there would be in this an indifference to forms of guilt. There's something of hope in that. I mean, I don't, as you know, I don't know that one can be persuaded by this and just be affected by it or not affected by it, as Bruce said before.
Military state.
But I think there's hope in that. That's a hope. The hope that one
For a
would be
moment.
standing
I feel
somewhere
better.
that's not
I feel
about
better.
guilt. Yeah,
For a moment.
for a moment.
Thank you. Okay, I've been really holding off here. There's a wonderful discussion on page 63 about use me.
Yeah.
Good discussion of the simulacrum on page 67. All this is about Augustine again. He's bringing it back. And there's a really discussion of the Victorians on page 7. Okay, something tells me that on page 79 under the tensor, I need to take a look at this. Okay?
This is your daemon, Victor?
Yeah. Once again, then, the duplicity of the sign, the question of the signs are unfaithful. And the semioticians want to make them faithful. The question of which may now be formulated in these terms. When the emotion, phantasm, speaks simulacrum, is it not necessary that there be adultery or prostitution, adultery of words with intensities to the detriment of the concept, prostitution of intensity in the interest of exchanges? If for Plawsowski, the art of making simulacra is to be classed under the rubric of adultery, because it is the law of syntax in all of its rigor, the disjunctive bar, which finds itself invested as an opportunity for jouissance and vertigo. For Baudelaire, it is with prostitution that the artistic action of translating phantasms into simulacra must be identified. We remember. What is love? The need to escape oneself. All love is also prostitution. And what is art? Prostitution. The day the young writer corrects his first proofs, he is as proud as a scholar who has just caught his first pots. Towards the end, there's this long discussion about being an academic. You got to read it. I mean, there's the jokes. They're real. I've lived this. I've seen this. All the people around me are living this. But I'm still laughing. Okay. The theme of adultery in Plawsowski's work, for example, in The Laws of Hospitality, brings the theme of prostitution with it. Boy, did Lyotard get in so much trouble talking about prostitution in this book. I mean, big time trouble. Just think more people are going to read the book. Yeah, well, so if the husband becomes his wife's pimp, if he pushes her into his nephew's arms, it is not so that on this occasion libidinal energy may be converted into money that he will collect. In other words, how will the libidinal economy turn into capitalism? It is not so that the tensor signs of the perverse emotion give way to the intelligent signs of the trade of pimps. It is in order to assess the impossible price he accords to Robert, and therefore to introduce measure, weight, and thought into the unthinkable excess of what binds him to the pieces of his body, his wife. So he's going back to talking about the body here is political and drawing out all kinds of inferences. Like, I don't want to read this. And finally, we get back to the Minotaur, the Centaur on page 81. Blazowski's book on Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle is being discussed here. Page 81, in prostitution, one goes from intensity to ardor, in adultery, from ardor to intensity. Yeah, we got a lot of trouble with this. On page 86, he's talking about prostitution, customers, tensor sign, intelligent sign, social body, perversion, and everything. Basically, what he's saying is the economy is based on, a libidinal economy is based on pimps, prostitutes, customers. The book obviously is provocative. The book, from time to time, attempts to give some hope, promises some hope of some kind, but it keeps undercutting itself. He's not a romantic. He is not sentimental. When we get back from break, we're going to look at the desire named marks. This is the really, I think, powerful part of the work. And everything after that is just, oh my God,